But do you know that actually the production of anything that we could use to make cloth was just as important, because at the time of the Neolithic there had been quite dramatic changes in the climate, and also woolly mammals, that provided fur to make clothing. They were being hunted to extinction. And so there was this change in the climate. We needed something to protect ourselves from wet weather, for example. And so actually the question was, how can we provide food, but how can we provide cloth? And so I think what's really fascinating is a lot of these, first farming communities, it was about the production of, say, wool that could be used to produce cloth. So about domesticating livestock, not just for the meat, but so that we could produce cloth. So animals were not just walking larders, they were walking wardrobes. And, cloth was something that, the production of cloth really was dominated by women. And again, we know that from their burials, because women tended to be buried with the equipment associated with, spinning and weaving. So actually there's a lot more going on in the Neolithic that revolves around women's lives and what women were doing for the economy, I think.
And going back to clothes, clothes was not only like to dress yourself, it was also like the first global coinage. So that's an important role women also played on that sphere.
Yeah, that is right. Cloth, the power of cloth in human history, it's not just something that has been used to make, pretty skirts and, smart suits. Cloth was in many ways the first form of money. And this was particularly important, of course, for trade, for buying and selling all things across the economy. And I would say probably the first big trade boom in history was the Bronze Age. So now we're looking about 5,000 years ago, something like that, when humans started to take, copper and
Bronze
tin.
Age is more or less Egypt, Mesopotamia, as that age, more or
less. So very much associated with the rise of the Egyptian civilization, the rise of the Mesopotamian civilization. So 3000 BC, 2000 BC, up to the Bronze Age. There was a big collapse at the end of the Bronze Age, which was about 1200 BC. So we're looking at the second and the third millennium BC. And so, why was there, the first big trade boom of human history then? Because people had to go and search for tin. So for example, go all the way to Afghanistan, for example, to bring tin back to the Middle East, the cradle of civilization, to then mix with copper from, say, the Turkish copper mines to produce bronze. And bronze was a transformative substance. In a way, it's like AI is today. AI is transforming technological possibilities for the economy. And bronze did that 5,000 years ago. So, for example, it enabled the production of more complex and harder weapons and tools. So it really transformed the economy. But, and again, often when we think about the people producing the bronze, we think about men, men the hunters, men the farmers, men the bronze producers. But women were producing the cloth that formed the currency of global trade, with which people travelled with this cloth on the side packs of donkeys or camels to go in search of and then to pay for the tin. So cloth was, it was money before the money that we would think of as money today existed. Before silver coins, before banknotes, there was cloth. And I would say that cloth, there were three good reasons really why cloth worked really well as a form of money. So firstly, it's light, it's lightweight, doesn't weigh very much. So you can roll it up and you can take it on your travels. Secondly, by feeling and looking at the cloth, you can judge the quality. And if you're going to use something as a form of exchange, the person who needs to be tempted to accept it from you needs to judge the quality of it. And thirdly, it's non-perishable. So, using food to pay for things, the problem, it works in the short term, but you might not reach it might have gone off. No. But also the people that are receiving that from you, they might want to store that value. You can put cloth in your, in your storeroom, and you can go back 2 years later, still there, and you can then use it, at a later date. Whereas with food, perhaps if it's cheese, perhaps cheese gets better. But vegetables and bread, I wouldn't want to 2 years on. So cloth was the first form of money for those three reasons. And we know that women were producing cloth, and actually one of the women cloth producers that I talk about in the book, we know about her. She was a woman called Lamassi, and so she lived around about 2000 BC, and she had a cloth making business in what is today Iraq, and her husband traded her cloth in Turkey. And the reason we know about Lamassi and her cloth making business is that she wrote letters to her husband in Turkey. And those letters have survived.
Yeah. So she also knew how to read and write.
She knew how to read and write. And at the time, people wrote on clay. Yeah. So not on paper, but on clay. And what happened was that clay would be left out in the sun. It would harden. And because she wrote on clay, that survived the test of time. Yeah. I mean, if you write on paper, it might not survive 4,000 years, but papyrus. She wrote on clay. And we can see from the letters that she wrote to her husband that she, for example, sends lists of the cloth that she was shipping to him for him to trade in Turkey on her behalf. But she also sends, family greetings, family news. And at times she's quite tough on her husband. So you can tell in these letters that sometimes they argue. Yeah. And clearly from one of these letters, he had in a previous letter said to her something like, "I'm not happy with the quality of your cloth that you're sending me." And so she replies in this particular letter that we have, saying, "Who is this man who dare criticize the quality of my cloth? Yeah. He is not worthy of my home." No. So she clearly had a lot of power. And her daughter got involved in the cloth making business as well. We see that from the letters. So Lamassi was just one of many women who were there, not just producing cloth, but running their own cloth making workshops, employing other women at the time to produce the currency, not just of Iraq, but what was at the time the currency of the global economy.
And so I would say that's something that has been historically common, for example, to have a domestic enterprise, a family-owned business. Yeah. And I mean, always the face, or sometimes the face is a man. But the truth is that the real ones ruling it are women, and people don't get to know it. So that's really interesting, and you to talk about it in your book too.
It is. Well, I think the really fascinating thing as well is that we think of family businesses as being a historic thing. But actually, still today, the majority of businesses are family businesses. Family businesses are the backbone of the economy. The economy wouldn't exist without family businesses. When you think about all of the hard work that is done generation on generation within these family businesses. But you're right that often when you look at the sign above the door, it's Collins and Sons, or Williams and Sons, or in Spanish. And that really hides the fact that women, mothers, wives, daughters, have always worked, just as hard as men within family businesses. But, whether that's for social reasons or whether for legal reasons, because of course in so many societies women haven't had the right to sign contracts, and so legally the firm is in contractual terms is owned by the men of the family, but actually behind the scenes women were working just as hard. And I think one really nice piece of evidence of that is, and we see this from business directories going back hundreds of years, is how many widows took on the business after the death of their husband. And I think the fact that throughout history widows have stepped in and taken on the business after the sad death of their husband, to be able to do that and do it successfully, you had to be involved beforehand. So I think the evidence is there if we look for it.